thank you all for being here. I know this is kind of an unusual year for Scale, and especially for anybody who traveled. Just thanks for showing up. Some other things to know before I dive in. I was told originally upon submitting this talk that people had trouble really understanding what it was about. So I decided to take a step back from the technical part and add some explanation as to why this technology exists and is being developed. So we may do more or less of a deep dive, but I really wanted to start with the reasons for me, some of what my passions are. And parametric geometry is the particular discipline that we'll be discussing. But content discovery, for me, was what drew me into this field and got me energized. And this is a tool set that can be used for a lot of different things. You can use it for market research, you can use it for trading, you can use it for epidemiology. We'll talk more about that. For me, what was most interesting was really discovery. And so without further ado, I'm actually going to start by talking about a book. This is a book called Decrypting Rita by Margaret Trouth. It's a comic. It's a very innovative comic because it's all digital. All of the artwork was produced digitally. It's all vector art. Very interesting story. It's about a woman whose boyfriend traps her in several different parallel realities. Very unusual storytelling. It's like the Ulysses of comics. It's a really interesting, complex read. I'm going to guarantee, I would bet if I could think of something good to bet, that nobody in this room has heard of it. I stumbled upon it in the author's hometown, which is Seattle. And then when I was in Portland, where I lived, the actual comic book shop where I tried to look for the next volume, this is only volume 1 out of 3, they'd never heard of it. And if you stump the comic book guy, you know it's probably pretty obscure. And so my question really is, what's missing? This is an interesting topic. It's unusual. It deals with queer themes. Why didn't more word get out? Why is it only available on a small press? Why did it never get picked up by an influencer or have social media kind of propagate that story? This is one example, but there are so many examples if you follow the world of independent media, of music, film, books, all of these voices that just get overlooked. A lot of my friends are artists, and I'm blown away by their talent. But it's really, really difficult to advance to that next level unless somebody famous picks you up and popularizes what you're doing, or unless you pay a whole lot of money to marketers and publicists and advertisers. And that's the impetus for the title of this talk, which is Discovery Without Marketing. That is the pull behind the problem that I'm trying to solve, which is basically how do we widen up this playing field again? This may be only a Generation X thing. I'm very much Gen X. We love to put obscure songs on mixtapes. We love to just sort of wow our friends with references. But even aside from that, my feeling is that knowledge is getting lost and missed and passed over. And it's not just me. I've gone on my little soapbox for the first few minutes. I'm now going to actually share a very brief conversation I had on a social network with a senior manager at Amazon. And we talked about content discovery. And he confirmed his exact words, that's the biggest issue we're all tackling. So the most major corporations, the Amazons, the Googles, the Spotify, they're grappling with the exact same problem, which is there's this fire hose of information and no way to get it to people who might actually enjoy it or like it or benefit from it. 4 million songs on Spotify have never even been played once. If you happen to be the creator of one of those 4 million songs, that kind of sucks for you, but I think it sucks more if you're the listener, because people have very different tastes. We're all different people and different beings, and what we enjoy unfortunately gets compressed. So, you know, to be very clear, this was not a protected conversation. I talked to the guy before, and we just talked in very general terms. You know, Amazon's solution, or so I'm told, is pretty much predictive algorithms. They're doing some things around the UX, but predictive algorithms basically considered the way to go. The problem being, you have all of this data out there, and you're narrowing the stream to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 suggestions that pop up on a page at any one given time. You're trying to drink an ocean of knowledge with a straw. And it's limiting. And if they get something wrong, it can be very frustrating. I listen to YouTube almost every day at work, and I'm always just boggled that the same songs come up again and again. I do everything I can to just seed the mix with obscure music, but somehow it always comes back to early 80s new wave. I don't know why, it just does. Our goal is really to take that fire hose and turn it into something more like a fountain, where there is order and pattern, and there is a predictive element, but there's simply more choice and more access to a wider range of results set. And we'll drill down more into what this means as we go further. AI plus UX. It's funny, there was a talk about this here at Scale yesterday, AI in design. I just read an article on the subject a week ago. It's starting to be a hot topic, I think. You know, how can AI improve design? How can it help designers innovate? Mostly what I've been seeing are tools for, say, producing better textures, optimizing CSS, just creating better aesthetics, making designers' jobs easier. These are very worthwhile goals. What happens when you combine AI plus user experience in design with parametric geometry is something else entirely. And this is where we go back to the deep dive just a little bit. What is parametric geometry? Parametric geometry is a way to draw graphics using equations, not pixels. So basically, 3-dimensional vector artwork. And there are any number of tools and languages you can use for parametric 3D designs. Three.js is what I built these models based on. It's a JavaScript 3D animation library. It was released in 2010. And what's neat about it is it's fully web-based. You can use it on a phone. You can use it on any browser. You don't need to download additional software. It makes a 3D environment just immediately accessible in any browser environment. Here's a bit of an example of what it might look like. And you can see there are controls. Typically, it's very easy to manipulate surfaces, shapes. If you're interested in any of the stuff, I really urge you to check out the website three.js, three.js.org. It's updated all the time, and there are so many just great examples of cool things that people are doing. And those can be anything from modeling and rendering to artwork, all the way to games. And so it's a technology that's been around for a number of years. It's mature. I think it's maybe a little bit underutilized and overlooked, but it's pretty well developed and pretty well built out. I'm going to show you the first parametric geometry project that I worked on in depth, and it's actually a trading analytics application. So what this does, it's 3D, and every line on this graph represents a different altcoin. There are 2,100 lines on the graph. The ones in the inmost circle are your Ethereum, your Bitcoin, your Litecoin, the ones that are best known and have the highest coin price. The ones on the far edge are essentially penny stocks. So coins that have a much lower price and are more in the emerging range. And again, apologies, very simple interface. This isn't something that's going to win any design awards. I designed it to be functional for me. The lines represent growth trends. So a coin with a pink line, that's a 20% growth trend. A yellow line represents a 5% growth trend. You can click around, you can adjust, filter out anything that's less than 1 million in volume. You can look at price changes over an hour, over a day, over 7 days. And where this is different than most charts that you find in most trading tools is you also have the opportunity as you click through and as you look at the different highlighted coin lines on the chart, you can click and you can actually go directly to the coin and learn a lot more information and see, well, how is Bitcoin Gold doing? It doesn't seem to be doing very much lately, but what does the trend look like for the last week? That's kind of interesting. Maybe it's a buying opportunity. Maybe it's not. Essentially, this is a way to just get a whole lot of trend-based information in one place. And you could apply it really to anything. It's just calculus, addition, subtraction. It's a spreadsheet on steroids. And of course, I don't know how many times all of you have heard the word coronavirus in the last week. I think in terms of epidemiology, and I think what if you used a chart like this to be able to update the number of cases in different municipalities in real time? What if you could see on this chart 3,000 cities and not just see the total number of cases, but see where rates were rising highest? Because it means something very different when you've got a high growth rate, you know, from 1 to 2 cases, that's a 100% increase, versus if you're in the middle of that chart versus close to the center. So this is sort of the easiest and the original way to use what I've been calling Lotus Petal Architecture, and that's basically just to analyze trends data. You can apply other kinds of filters. I'll show a few examples of what that looks like, but essentially it's just a visual way to get a really large at-a-glance sample and then be able to drill down very quickly. Go ahead. Each one of these lines on the chart is actually a currency. So, yes. So and the significance of, I have to do a better demo. I will at some point. the significance of the ranking of the petals is also important. The topmost link will have the highest value, and then as you go through the petal, the values descend. It's really designed to show information where the order of the top 10 is maybe not that important, whether something is 1 or 2 or 4, but to be able to show that in the context of the top 20 and 40 and 50 and just rank a lot of information numerically. So once you're familiar with this type of chart, you know that something that's a short line in an inner petal is going to be very different from something that's at the top of the petal versus something that's a long line.
So the circles are what vector?
The circle. Are you talking about the ring shape?
Yeah.
Underlying? It's just part of the geometry. In terms of what they represent, the innermost circle is typically going to be the highest value, and that could be defined in different ways, in price, in number of hits. If there is a middle circle and there is an always, it will be in between. And if there is an outer circle, then that will be the lowest value, so the outliers or the emerging data. And one of the interesting things about this structure is you can very easily make it fractal. And in theory, represent a limitless amount of data with a shape very much like this. You have your inner ring defined, you have your outer ring defined, and then the middle would be something that you would just drill into and dynamically update. One of the great potential uses of this tool set is that it integrates really well with Node. So creating real-time charts that update automatically, once you have that framework in place, there's nothing to it. Go ahead. Great question. And I'm tempted to actually take you further into the presentation. I'd urge you to look around at the lotus.fm splash page, because there all of the links will be active. Here it's just a subset because it was just distracting to have all of them be active. I only wanted to focus on the coins that were showing growth. But your question, can you repeat your question? Yeah. Yeah, chart lines. Yeah, the basic building lines would be chart lines within a petal. The number of petals within a ring, that's a user-defined variable. Some variables work better than others. It's important, obviously, that you choose a symmetrical number. And so in terms of how you wanted to structure it, you really want to structure just for clarity. In theory, you could put thousands of lines up on the screen. This one is 2100. In theory, you can go up to 3000. I wouldn't necessarily push it to the very edge of that. But it's basically just assigning data in a way that you know highest values along the top, next highest level values, one rung less in height. Next highest, so it would go essentially 1, 2, 3, then it would go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then on to 8, 9, and then on to your 10, your 11. Again, it's hard to see on this example, but hopefully this is making some kind of sense. It's just a way to count an ordered list from top to bottom. And what's cool about it is that it's a much more efficient way to display data than your standard bar chart or your standard spreadsheet or list view. Just to give you an example, this is 2,100 coins in theory. They're not all lit up. They could be if that was wanted. And now we're going to go and we're going to actually just do a little experiment to see how long it takes to scroll through the same list of cryptocurrencies and on CoinMarketCap, which is where all this data comes from. I'm having to be careful with the slides right now not to reload anything because I just went over my API limit for the day. But so we're scrolling down. We get to 29. Yep. We keep scrolling. We keep scrolling. Yeah, so far, this is equivalent, we're at 54, so this is equivalent to about one of these petals in the center. That's how much is being shown. And it's abstracted, but it's not all that abstracted. You can use JavaScript to just immediately mouse over and preview the results. You can navigate very easily to links. It's an interactive map, basically, a way to see the big picture. Totally. And we're going, and we're going. Still going, still going, still going. I'm honestly scrolling as fast as I can. And we're now at 200, and it's going to ask me to load more. Yeah, so imagine you're a day trader and you're trying to just sort of make the next big score with cryptocurrency, and you're just trying to look for that one thing which is kind of mid-cap and rising and showing growth. It's really hard to pick the needle out of a haystack with a format like this. The goal is basically just to sort of find the information you want and be able to flag it almost instantaneously. So that's what appealed to me. Yes. Yeah. Right now, this is only showing ups because I was actually only interested in what was trending up, but you could very easily add in red lines. Yeah. You could zero in. In some ways, a graph like this is more useful if you're only looking at, say, the top 400 only. So you might want to look only at mid cap or low cap or high cap, but all these parameters are very easily customizable. And I would say for anyone, as far as trying this at home, this link is actually available with the talk, and it is a public link. But again, because I'm using this under a personal license, if you get there and it's broken, I would just say don't blame me. It's something I would love to have the means to make available to more people if there's demand or interest. We'll talk about that in a bit because the TLDR design inventions are very hard to protect with open source, and we're trying to do it right, which means lawyers. So we'll get there, but thanks for asking. So some more background just on what are geometric links. This is a term. It's not an image map. It's basically just an object that's wrapped around another object. One set of functions is used to actually draw out the geometric shape. And then another set of functions. It's all just JavaScript, very simple client-side stuff is used to assign different lines of value and make them dynamic and clickable. So I'd love to be able to go through some of that code. Hopefully that will be possible in the very near future. And you can obviously make a 3D parametric geometry structure and map it to anything as part of any application. What's great about three.js, because it's already written for the web, is it's just very well designed to use with links. It just really lends itself to that. So, yeah, all of us remember image maps. Maybe your first coding project, like you got very excited and you put all these circles and squares on a graphic. Not a lot has really been done with navigation conventions since then. They're text links, they're buttons on web pages, ways to swipe or to hover. But geometric links, my feeling is that they have a lot of potential just as a way to be able to access a vast amount of data comprehensively and quickly. So that leads me to, people are occasionally asking, what is Lotus Petal Architecture? What does any of this mean? And I was like, I really have to show you. It's very tough to explain in words unless you've got a very good visual imagination. But basically, it's just a front end for big data. That's what it is. It's really good for revealing growth trends, like we talked about, be they stocks, be they epidemiology. It's also very well suited for machine learning insights. So, we're not limited to pure calculus here. Something goes up 10% or down 10%. You can use it just with, hello, folks, yourselves at home, with any kind of output from any kind of training data. And there are a lot of ways in which this tool can be used. There are a lot of ways to see the story of the data. It's very good for anything, be it real estate, HR, online dating, where you're just looking and making a quick thumbnail assessment within about half a second. Am I interested enough to find out more? Am I not? That's the time frame that it's very well suited for. I like applications in the area of media and content discovery, but that's pretty much because, well, several reasons, but one of the big ones is just I'm an artist and I'm really interested in where art and code overlap. So so go on. Uh-huh. Could you repeat that? I didn't hear. Could I show or state a realistic example as it relates to this? Yeah, absolutely. This isn't going to be a very exciting or sexy example, but it's one that occurred to me. Let's say you work at a bank, and the bank has a fraud detection department, and you're one of the managers who's actually assigned to fraud, and to investigating fraud, and deciding what cases are going to be handled by the automated system, and what cases are going to require further resources and require manual intervention. And you probably have thousands of different notifications cross your desk every single day. And you have to have some way of prioritizing them. But if you're using a system where it's just based on what comes in first, or just a few indicators, you're going to miss things. So this becomes a way that you can just, for workflow, very easily scan through a large amount of tasks and see what's the most urgent. And just look from the point of view of several different parameters and several different filters. And again, see what's the most urgent. Is that answering your question? You'd requested a real world example? And again, it helps if you see it in action. So, yeah, I talk a lot about the lotus. The lotus flower, it's a very good shape, but you can build parametric geometry to look like anything. This is an artichoke, for an example. Succulents are another really, really great natural organic shape that can be adapted. A starburst or ray, again, forms that have symmetry are very well suited to parametric designs and visualization. If you're creating a new model, I would really urge you not to overload the types of data or the whistles and bells. You want it just to be easy to read and to make sense and for people to sort of develop more subtleties as they spend more time with it. Just even a simple grid can be a great framework just for navigating. Actually, probably my next task, how many of you have read William Gibson's Neuromancer at some point? Great, yeah, I see some hands, so at least 3, excellent. I would like to actually make a clickable grid that just resembles what he writes about in his book. That's on my to-do list for this spring, because I think it would be cool. And it's like bowl of Lucky Charms. You run into some copyright issues, but you really could make parametric geometry that was just like a cereal bowl. I think it makes a lot more sense to think carefully about your use case. If this set of tools becomes more widely used, certain standards are going to emerge. I did the first version of this talk about almost a year ago with a 2600 group, and just some of the examples we threw around: surfing the web again, doing an animated news ticker where the volume and the height would oscillate based on the volume of news and the amount of traffic being generated. I really think it's important to do some work in this area around climate change and better visualizations that help people understand that these problems aren't just about borders on a map, but really looking at trends in different parts of the world and finding commonalities. So, you could have a community in Texas and a community in India which are experiencing very similar phenomenon, but they don't know it. They have no way to relate the drought or the flooding that they're experiencing, or sort of know what other solutions may have worked in other communities. So that's an area that I'd love to see more work done in. And I'll also say, even though most of the examples I've talked about are 3D, because number one, it looks cool, it's great for VR, and you can actually show a lot more data. Parametric geometry doesn't have to be 3D. Something very simple you could do is a search engine, which is color-coded. And suddenly, instead of having 10 results show on your search screen, you simply mouse around. You have maybe an area that's for classifieds, an area that's for news, an area for social, and an area just for organic search results. More popular results appear in the middle of the graph. Less highly ranked results appear near the end. And suddenly, at a glance, you can search on a single topic, maybe cars, maybe a particular model or make of car, and very efficiently and meaningfully browse through 1,000 different results instead of 10. So for people who like to have that greater choice, who like having access to more information, not everybody does, some people do, this is a good tool for you. And now I'm going to show you just a little bit of another implementation, which is slightly more advanced, but still very much a work in progress. One thing I've got to say, So this is an interactive chart showing the top 400 music videos of all time from Portland, Oregon. And as most of you know, South by Southwest was canceled this year. It's a little harder to find out what the really good trending music is, what you should check out. If you're an A&R scout, whoever you are, it's hard to be in the loop. So maybe check out something like this. You've got the very well-known bands in the centers. You've got your Everclear, yes, Everclear. You've got your Shins. You've got your Quarter Flash, Dandy Warhols, and a lot of bands basically that you'll recognize. And again, this is only 400 links. It's actually a little fewer because I haven't filled out all the spots yet. But you can still see the difference as you go from the inner to the outer pedal. And you get out here, and you click on these links, and suddenly it's music that you've never heard of. And I would love to actually play some of these songs for you, because a lot of them are just good and interesting. But since this is being streamed over the internet, that's not possible. If you light up all of the genres, this is what it looks like. If you choose, say, just hip-hop, you can see where hip-hop is represented in Portland. Lots around the periphery, around the outer pedals, many fewer in the inner pedals. You don't have to click on a link to actually see what it is. You can just mouse over it. So this, to me, it's closer to the experience of actually being in a record store, just thumbing through a lot of records or seeing them in front of you versus the experience of being on an online, either an online shopping experience or music experience where you're just clicking and getting these neat little grids. You can see more in less time. Where did I get what? The data? Oh, it's all YouTube. And that we kind of want to move away from that because one lesson I've learned is that any proprietary API can go away unexpectedly with very little notice. We thought it made sense to start with YouTube just because we could get access to a lot more artists and materials, but we're working on putting together our own song list. We've got about 800 songs now, and the next iteration of this will ideally be based out of Creative Commons licensed music and include several million songs. So that's where we're aiming to get. Does the geometry reflect attributes of the videos like popularity, was your question. And the answer is yes, exactly. That's what it is. Again, these top links in the center, those are the all-time 8 most popular songs. This is number 1, the Shins Simple Song. That's the number 1 all-time video for Portland. And you can go through the list. Number 3 is Quarter Flash. So we're not looking at a lot of traits. We could add in something like growth trends, definitely the same way that we did for the cryptocurrency chart. But right now, we're primarily just looking at overall popularity and genre. And then there's a pink overlay on the inner ring. Partly that's a matter of aesthetics, and it's also just to indicate, again, that there's a difference on the values and that they're a little more popular. So, your question in the back? It's all done based on, they're all ordered based on the number of views. So it changes dynamically over time. Every time this page loads, it's updated through a series of API calls to YouTube, and based on that information, the songs are assigned their slots. Okay.
Are you saying, on the last day, you say, I want this many items in the pedal, and then the algorithm automatically determines how many pedals you want? Or are you saying, I want, let's say, 5 pedals distributed equally?
You could do them either way. At the moment, a lot is hard-coded because it's just easier, and you get fewer unexpected results. You could definitely build a model where the number of petals was elastic based on the input of data. You'd still probably want to have a maximum and a minimum value shown.
So right now you have the number of pedals in the article.
Right now, the number of petals is hard-coded for each visualization, yes. And thank you for asking that question. Yeah. It's really, really difficult is the answer. Right now, we have a provisional patent filed that was filed early last summer. Before that expires, we need to make some licensing decisions. It's a big decision. I don't want to make it alone. A number of other people have been part of this project, and we also want to give people who may be interested in being future stakeholders an opportunity to comment. The real challenge with any type of UX innovation, and there haven't been a lot, honestly, in the last few years. You know, you've got your mouse, you've got your browser window. There haven't been too many major changes. Is that they are very easy for a larger organization to copy, to change slightly, and then to apply what's called a design patent, which is different than a utility patent. Utility patent is back-end, that's the code, that's the 1,500 lines of JavaScript, not that exciting. I'm sure some of you in this room could probably replicate it all in a day or 3. But the innovation itself, the idea of just a different way to use code is more vulnerable, because while you can create a precedent through what's called prior art, and that's part of why I was showing some other examples of what this might be, is, in all honesty, to establish prior art. If somebody thinks of a new one, and they have the muscle and the dominance in the market, they can then go ahead and sort of really push for that to become the standard. And that's unfortunate, because you end up potentially with a lot of slots being hogged and just redundancy. So I don't. In a perfect world, it would be possible to just open source all of this and have it all remain in the commons. I've been talking to great people at the Open Invention Network about how to do that. Basically, we need to put in a really strong defensive publication. It's looking like that's going to require additional legal resources. So that's, I mean, good question, but there's not an easy answer. Yep. Yeah. Well, we have some talk and some time, and that wasn't a public talk. So for instance, this thing, which is now upside down, to refresh it, is this was launched on Veterans Day of November 2019. So we have, and likewise, the first implementation, the coin implementation, that was just for my own personal use, and that was never made public. So we've been trying to keep an eye on the code, but really just our goal is, number one, to get this into use, because we think it has a lot of value, Number two, to do so in a way that benefits the commons and is accessible. And I would like to be able to continue working on this. I have a day job, but for me, this is very fascinating and interesting stuff. But go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to be sure I understand what, so this is just a diagrammatic structure that you come up with.
Yeah, it's chart. It's an interactive chart.
It doesn't matter that it's three.js or D3 or whatever else you choose. You're just saying this particular way of displaying information is new and novel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it may be that somebody else has done something similar based on my research. I haven't seen it. If people can send me other examples, it would save a lot of headache and some resources and time. But yeah, it's this approach to 3D visualization, which it's essentially building something that is interactive. And at the same time having those interactive geometric links represent actual data.
So, I mean, what's unique about it is not just the design, how you structure the data underneath. This is what I'm trying to parse out.
Yeah,
The way that you do things in three.js is irrelevant or is relevant.
it's certainly relevant because if you were to say build within a compiled platform and as a desktop standalone app, you wouldn't be able to do all of the same things that you can do. I'm a little bit familiar with it. Yeah, it seems like they'd probably play well together. But yeah, the fact that this is a set of technologies for the web, that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate that I believe it should be open. It lends itself well to any set of protocols where there's interlocking data and where you're able to just preview and navigate quickly and cleanly to other sites. That may not be the direction in which the consumer or the business web and world of technology is going. We're seeing many more walled gardens. Could you integrate this into a spreadsheet program? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that would be a bad thing, but to me, what really makes this special is the fact that all of this data, you don't just see in front of you, it can take you places. Yeah. At this point, and this is really, it's a whole other talk. We spent a lot of time last summer working on an Ethereum blockchain model for how to fund an open source project without an ICO. That's really, really difficult. ICOs were a great way to fund open source up until the SEC clamped down. That actually happened to me. I ran a very small boutique boutique ICO just as that door was closing. In answer to your question, and I'll get you. Can you rephrase it so I can say it in the mic this time? Well, you're saying it sounds like our intellectual property strategy is more defensive than offensive. And I would say, honestly, at this point, all options are open. What we want to find is a way that this technology can develop to its fullest. That probably does require some capital. The way that we think is best to pursue this, ideally, is to do what we call smart crowdfunding. And that is basically a way in which you tie the license to a specific funding goal. If the goal is reached, then the code is licensed. If the goal is not reached, then the code is not licensed. But code is law. You can't have any sort of last-minute back alley negotiations. You can't have Microsoft suddenly call me up and be like, oh, we'll give you $1 million for this. I mean, that would be nice if it happened. For where we are right now, I think that we are pretty much focused on just tying this up in a way that not only do we and others have the freedom to innovate, but somebody else can't come along and close off major areas of thought after us. That really is our goal. I think the big challenge, if we go for, say, a copyleft solution and go sort of the most virtuous and idealistic path, is who would then be prosecuting any kind of breach? Who would have the resources, or who would pick up that banner? So these are just, some issues to contemplate. I'm going to move along now since we're almost at the end of time. Some next steps for this project. The big one is developing a mobile UX. I have some thoughts about that. Hint, hint, it's not just zoom and pan. Equally important and very closely linked, keyboard and assistive support. Right now, this is not a good platform if you have vision disabilities or if you don't like to use a mouse that much. In the next iteration, it will be the opposite. It will make it much easier to tab and toggle through your work, and that's where some of the workflow management applications that we were talking about earlier also come right back in. My former administrative assistant has a vision disability. She's a good friend, so she'll be the live tester on that part. Just as part of all of the next steps, we've got a lot of code refactoring in front of us. If any of you try this out on your own on Firefox, I should warn you, it's a CPU hog. You'll probably see spikes of above 50%. That's a known issue. It will be fixed. One of the biggest challenges is making time for continuous iterations of usability testing in particular. In most cases, you don't have the designer and the person who's developing the code in the same role, and there's a reason for that. It takes a long time. It's very humbling to put something that you worked on in front of other people and watch them click around and figure out which parts they get, which parts they don't get. What makes up for it is when they light up and when they see the value in what you're doing. But we're really committed to not just doing something that looks cool, but something that's really usable and really intuitive and sets a new standard for design. And then this is the fun part. So you've seen the current Lotus chart. This is all based on quantitative data. It's all based on ranking. It's like a top 40. It's like one of the old countdown charts in its own way. And all of these links only plays a single song. So that's really a limitation at this point. And there are ways we could get around that, but then we would be going very deep into YouTube land, and we sort of want to do our own thing. What does our own thing look like? It's going to be cool. It's going to have a different interface than the Lotus, although containing some similar elements. And it's going to be a predictive AI system which incorporates training data from about 600 plus microgenres of music. So our goal, if you can get to enough different categorizations, say your acid jazz versus your free jazz versus your Dixieland jazz, and train a machine to recognize those categorizations, what that means in theory is that you can work with a smaller set of data to put together an intelligent playlist that's customized for the user. You don't need many millions of songs. You probably still need thousands, but you can work with a set of data that's workable and is available within the commons. So we're really excited about that potential. One of the things people often struggle with when they choose a CC license is, how is this music going to get seen or heard or found? We believe that our solution, which is real and practical, I'm working with 2 other coders in the Portland area, as well as 2 who are remote. It's something that's very implementable and can change that balance. So that's where we're hoping to go. Other fun use cases, we've talked about VR and AR. I'd love to see a hologram of Lotus Petal. Just think that would be fun. There is a lot of opportunity for AI to actually design and generate this type of discovery module down the line. And there's a lot of opportunity to build GUIs just to make it easier to configure the system. So again, coming closer to just being an extensible spreadsheet. So we think that's cool. And in terms of where we go from here, I would really like to say, if you're at all interested in this, connect with me on GitHub, on Twitter, wherever is preferred. My personal blog is Art Meets Code, and we have a lot of very important milestones and decisions to make coming up in the next, say about the next 12 weeks. So if you'd like to be a part of that conversation and that discussion, we really invite you in. The way I've set up the public repo, for example, it isn't actually a public repo. Right now, it is a README file, a roadmap for a very ambitious project we could take on. And it is also a way to vote on the license. I just created 2 issues, one for permissive license, one for copyleft. And if you want to be involved, join the repo, leave a vote, and leave comments, or suggest another license. It's all good. I like to think of myself as benevolent. I'm not much of a dictator, but if you would like to be part of this project or know people who are interested in any of these 3, front end, design, AI, or music, get us in touch. Thanks very much. Any other questions? Okay, you first.
So it's a form of visualization that you're saying you're putting out there that is more efficient or more something.
Yes, more efficient, saves time. You can see more data with context in less time.
Just to clarify, if it's, so you were starting off saying that there's a lot of overlooked music, overlooked art, literature, comics, and so forth.
Yes.
This kind of visualization tend to unselect that.
Well, not necessarily, because what it works really well for is identifying what's trending but still not that popular. So things that are coming up. There,
If it's trending, then it's not popular. So invert your view. How are the peaks the trending, or are those the popular?
it's the difference between the outer ring, which is emerging artists, the middle ring, which is just the middle in between, and the inner ring, which would be the really well-established superstars. It's certainly a function of popularity. It's just opening up the space from, maybe 3 things that come up on your Twitter feed to 2,100. Did you have a question also? If you're curious about it, talk to me. There is a private repo, and I am fairly trusting in terms of who I grant access. I can't put it out in the public yet. So in answer to your question, you're saying, so for big data, the paradigm stays the same. The higher the peak, it's closer to the center, versus if it's further out, it's a lower value. And the answer is really yes and no, because parametric geometry is not just the lotus. It's what you build for yourself. And we hope that other people will take these designs and come up with more shapes and more forms and more models that haven't even yet been thought of yet. This one, it's optimized for trends analysis. It's optimized to show what's up and coming. It's optimized to show the punk rock band that maybe they only have a few hundred followers on Facebook, but they sell out at every show because they're awesome and word of mouth is spreading. That's the kind of thing it's good for. I should stress this is not just about the arts. It's also about code, and it's also about creators, and it's also about scientific literacy. We're living in an age right now where we have so many challenges in front of us. We need every perspective we can get that has value to be found and not overlooked. A great example, actually, to go back, am I allowed to keep talking? I see somebody at the door. Yeah. A great example, if an overused one, is Satoshi. And a lot of people say, well, who was the real Satoshi? Who is the real Satoshi? I think the very interesting question, and I happen to know this, is how was Satoshi discovered? And he was discovered in part by a man named Gavin Anderson, who's a friend and a colleague of mine. We both come from Western Massachusetts. We were talking about this over lunch one time. It was just like, so how did this Bitcoin thing happen? He's just like, yeah, I read the white paper. I thought it was interesting. I got some friends of mine to start mining, and this person who was not famous or a celebrity himself was able to get word of mouth and get a critical mass of interested people to where something could take off without marketing. It took something like 6 years from Bitcoin to go from being worth less than a penny to becoming a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. But it happened. What's that? Thanks to many things along the way, but the biggest challenge is always at the very beginning. It's that moment when there is a vector for information to spread. So I guess my question is, there are names that are discovered, like Satoshi, and there are names like Margaret Trouth, who remain kind of obscure. And apples to oranges, completely different industries. Maybe I shouldn't make that comparison, but I often find myself wondering how much is out there. Einstein was working as a clerk in the patent office when he published the theory of relativity. How many brilliant minds out there? How many in particular contributions? And I will say this because it is International Women's Day today. How many contributions from women and minorities are overlooked. As a queer female disabled founder, I have some obstacles when it comes to finding venture capital, maybe, but that doesn't really bother me. I think for me, what I'm most concerned with is getting this paradigm, which is open source, to be something that can work as a viable system for everybody, and really just allowing information to flow freely. So that's what inspired all of this. Yeah, that was my stump speech. I'm done now. Thank you. Thanks all.